Welcome to the Launch Capsule. With your host, James DuBos. Buckle up because your launch capsule begins now.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hey there, this is Jim DuBos, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The Launch Capsule. So today, we're going to focus on 10 aspects of a consulting agreement. So when a business owner exits the company and they're going to take on some form of a consulting or even employment agreement with the new entity, here are some of the things that I think you need to consider as you go through this process. Now, obviously, this is not intended to be legal advice. This is simply just from my own experience of operating businesses, exiting companies, and ongoing consultative relationship that I've had with those entities. So number one is what I'm just going to call the role and scope of services. And it's just clearly defining the duties, the time commitment, and expectations. Are you going to do things like strategic advising? Are you going to be involved in client transition, maybe supplier or industry relationships, whatever those services are going to be? You want to clearly define the duration, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, and is it part-time or full-time? And then lastly, if possible, try to include some form of deliverables or performance metrics just to give yourself and the entity that's contracting with you some comfort in what the outcomes or expectations are going to be. Number two is the compensation structure. So generally there'll be a cash compensation component, whether it be a monthly retainer or an hourly rate. The frequency and method of payment, are you going to invoice them on a monthly basis if there's net terms associated and so forth? Is there going to be equity compensation? So in this type of an example would be something like common stock versus preferred or even stock options. Maybe there's a vesting schedule. Is it time-based versus milestone-based? Is there a strike price if the options are issued? You want to define things like voting rights and dividends, liquidation preferences, all of these elements. And number three, related to equity, might be repurchase or forfeiture terms. So you're going to have clauses for things like repurchase rights if the termination of the consulting role occurs. Maybe there's exit triggers, voluntary termination for cause, a mutually agreed exit, whether the repurchase is fair market value, is it original issue price, or is it a discounted rate? Now, in these two areas of compensation, I want to stop here and just discuss the rollover equity that we discussed in a previous Launch Capsule episode. So if you took a portion of your purchase, rolled over 10, 15, 25% or more in the new entity, I strongly encourage you to consider an exit button, the button you can push for a period of time where you say, I'm working or consulting in this business and I want to exit at a predefined valuation. So typically that is generated from the trailing 12-month EBITDA number times some form of a multiple, but you predetermine what that number is going to look like. Because in many cases, I've seen entrepreneurs go through this process, they transition, and maybe 12 months in or 15 months in, they're going, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm ready to exit, and they can push that button knowing what their outcome is going to be. So it eliminates a lot of the contentiousness back and forth that can occur if you don't have this clearly defined. Okay, so number four are really the exit terms and the transition. And so you want to try to outline termination conditions with and without cause. You want to have some form of a notice period. Is it 30 days, 60 days, and so forth? And then what are the handoff obligations that might exist? So how do I do my knowledge transfer? If an earnout or a performance bonus exists, you want to make sure that it aligns with that trigger, similar to what we were discussing before. Number 5 is what I'll refer to as the confidentiality, non-compete, non-solicit. So you want to clearly have the confidentiality obligations during and after the term. They have to be clearly defined and stated. You want to define non-compete duration and geographic scope is very critical. And there's a typical 12 to 24 month term on this type of an agreement. I would just say the longer the term generally is because the higher the dollar figure that's involved in the transaction and the actual consulting agreement. And then there typically will be some form of non-solicitation, both for employees and clients. Number 6 is going to be the IP and work product ownership. And so it's very common that any deliverables, intellectual property developed during the scope of the agreement is going to be assigned to the buyer. And then if there's specifically something that you developed, there needs to be a formal ownership transfer mechanism just so that there's no disputes in the future. Number 7 is tax implications. And so if the income is going to be treated as self-employment income, the equity might be eligible for capital gains. And this is where you need to have a conversation with your CPA and tax advisor, and also discuss if there's going to be a stock grant. Is there a way to make a particular elections? Again, so you're really just looking at tax efficiency as the consultant. If there's vesting and income recognition, have clear guidance on what that means from a tax liability standpoint. Number 8 is the board or advisory role, if this is applicable. And so if there's going to be a board seat or an advisory board participation, you want to make sure that's clearly outlined in the agreement. And if you possess any decision-making authority versus an advisory-only type role. Number 9 would be dispute resolution in the legal jurisdiction. So it's very common to have clear dispute resolution mechanisms. Is there mediation, arbitration, a court jurisdiction, what state laws govern the agreement, particularly if you are in separate states. And the number 10 would be simply the integration with the purchase agreement. So ensure that there's no conflicts with any reps, warranties, or earn-out provisions in the purchase agreement, or what they call the definitive purchase agreement. In most cases, during a transaction, they're going to make the consulting agreement an exhibit of the definitive purchase agreement. That's a very common element. Another aspect that we didn't really talk about is what is the location that you're going to perform the services from? Is it going to be on site at the original place of business where you were located prior to the acquisition, or are you going to do it remotely? That's another aspect to consider. The key here is to align the consulting agreement with that why in the beginning. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What are the outcomes that I want for the company, for the employees that are in my care, and my role going forward aligning with the life that I'm trying to outline post-acquisition. Look, I hope this was helpful to you. The goal here is to start your journey towards what is my role post-acquisition and what are the areas that I need to contemplate. I hope you have an awesome day, and we'll continue this journey together. See you soon.
That's a wrap for today's episode of The Launch Capsule. The Launch Capsule. With your host and mentor to success, James DuBos. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and share.